Thank you, Stu. So the objective with this session is to give you some insight into some of the work that's being done under the biosecurity portfolio. So it wouldn't be a biosecurity day without us having some conversation around brown marmorated stink bug, and this is some work that I'm sharing out of that biosecurity portfolio, as I mentioned in my introductory comments. So I'd like to start by orientating you within my presentation so you can get a bit of a feel for the roadmap of the journey that I'm taking you on. I think it's really important that I recognise that this work was done by partners that we have offshore in Italy, both the University of Bologna and the University of Modena and Reggio Emilia. So I really want to acknowledge the teams over there that have done the hard work that I'm going to present today. So two pieces of work that I'm going to present today, but they kind of meld into each other. So a couple of terms just to help you orientate on which methodology I'm referring to. The first project is a 2-year piece of work that we've done on the biology of brown marmorated stink bug, and I'm referring to that as the natural project because it was based on having natural infestations. We also looked at where it lives and feeds and when it breeds. This information is important because by understanding the pest life cycle, we then can target our control activities to have the biggest impact. The second piece of work was around understanding the impact of the brown marmorated stink bug, and we did that under that natural project, so with a natural infestation, but we also did a bit of an entomology acid test where we bagged fruit to really understand that kind of impact that was having, and I'm calling that the bagging trial. So we also, in that bagging work, looked at the timing and type of damage. And the outcome of this work helps us understand how we might deal with our fruit in the post-harvest phase of fruit management. So you've got your natural trial, which is reliant on natural infestations, and then a bagging trial of a real acid test. So a little bit of methodology, again, just to orientate you to the background to what we did. So we had both Hayward and Gold 3 in 2 orchards, so 4 orchard blocks in total, in Emilia-Romagna, and that's in the northeastern part of Italy, one of our main producing areas. We did sampling through March to November, which is the European spring and summer. Sonia's top tip is take the month day, the number of the month, so 6 is June, add 6 is 12, and that gets you into New Zealand thinking, but if it's a 2-digit number, subtract the 12. So just you need to shift everything by 6 months, but I've tried to reference the season to get you in the right head frame. We looked at the life stages. Brown marmorated stink bug has 6 separate life stages. We looked at overlaps, numbers of individuals of those different life stages, the cycles of generations that we saw in a season. We also looked at location and hosts and the impact, as I mentioned earlier, and also it was an opportunity to start looking for biological control agents. So that's the natural work, relying on natural infestations. If we move to the bagging trial, which is a real acid test, and you'll see a piece of fruit in that mesh bag up on the screen in the bottom right-hand corner. So this again was done on Gold 3 in Hayward. We started 40 to 50 days past fruit set and went into harvest. And each fortnight for a week, we put a brown marmorated stink bug adult into those mesh bag with the fruit. And then within the season and at harvest and then through post-harvest, we measured fruit impacts. And again, this was done in orchards in Emilia-Romagna. So we'll move into some results. From the natural infestation work, we were able to get a really clear picture of the life cycle of brown marmorated stink bug and the time that everything starts to happen. Now, if we start here and you have to be patient. All right. If we start here in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, what we've got is an adult that's overwintered and come out, and it starts by laying eggs. Into early summer, we start to see the first appearance of those nymph, or that kind of think like the young child and then through into the teenager stage. And then by the time we get into midsummer, from that nymph that's become an adult, we see another series of eggs being laid, nymph development, and at this stage what we've got occurring is a second population. And like we have with our scale pest, once we get into a second population you get quite an explosion of adult numbers, and we see that in autumn in Italy with brown marmorated stink bug. So the research was conclusive in showing that we're getting 2 generations happening, and that's why we get these populations explosions in the orchard. The other thing that was quite important in this work was to identify what other hosts were, and the researchers looked at occurrence and found numbers on, relatively high numbers on things like cherry trees, apricots and maples. To a lesser extent, the Judas tree and persimmon, they found relatively high numbers on weed species with fruit, such as nightshade. Now this becomes quite important because as with passion vine hopper, we have to think about our host management and not planting hosts that are attractive and providing a place for these insects to have a home. The interesting thing was that although they saw no difference in the level of numbers between the different orchards, there was a suspicion that the slightly lower numbers in orchards surrounded by these hosts was because the brown marmorated stinkbug preferred to be on these hosts rather than in the kiwifruit orchards. And one thing we have explored but not had a lot of success with is the concept of planting like trap crops that pull the insects out of the orchard. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword when it comes to managing those host plants around the orchard. So let's talk a little bit about the numbers and kind of getting into the timing of when things will happen. So I've given you an overall life cycle to orientate yourself, and let's get into some of the detail. So again, don't forget this is Europe, so June is middle of summer, December, equivalent for December in New Zealand. To orientate you, the blue line are the adult numbers and the red lines are the nymphs. Now what we saw is, as per that life cycle diagram, coming out of winter, those overwintering adults, and then you're getting that second generation and that explosion of population as you're going into that autumn harvest period. And in the Gold 3 orchard, they actually found adults still out in the orchard after harvest. If we look at the nymph situation, first nymphs are seen in early to mid-June, and then the numbers build in that late July or early August period with that second generation getting up and running. So you've got 2 years showing up on screen. On your left-hand side, the 2018 data, slightly lower numbers, sort of maxing out about 50 adults and about 40 nymphs. 2019, much higher numbers, and you'll see that the population build started earlier, and that correlated with weather data that showed a milder winter in 2019 and things kind of getting up and running a lot more quickly than 2018. So weather having a strong impact isn't surprising on the biology of the pest. So some of the summary findings from an impact perspective from that natural infestation study. Damage was observed in June in Hayward and July in Gold, which is kind of counter to what we'd expect given the phenology of those different varieties. We saw this adult numbers stabilise through July and into August, and then increase in harvest. Damage was high, up to 90%, but I think it's important that we remember this trial was run without insecticides. And what our Italian colleagues are finding is that they are currently, the growers have learnt to live with brown marmorated stink bug, but we do acknowledge that we're using some insecticides that could become challenging from a market access perspective. So the work that you're going to hear about today continues to be important. Another interesting point is that the difference in the type of damage on the different varieties. So with the Hayward on the bottom right-hand side, the left photo of the withered fruit, that's what tend to happen to the Hayward fruit, whereas with the Gold 3 bottom right-hand corner, you tended to see young fruitlets drop to the ground. And the concern is that with the Gold 3 dropping to the ground, it's great, anything that's been stung, you've got rid of it, because obviously you're not taking that into post-harvest. But there is a concern with the Hayward fruit that it'll be stung and enter the post-harvest supply chain and become a source of ethylene and over-ripening our crops. So in fact, from a management perspective, the damage to Hayward is more concerning. So if we move to some results from the bagging trial, so the Gold 3, again, we really saw the impact of the fruit drop there because the fruit was actually in the bag, so they were able to get a really good count on that. Again, quite high numbers of 93%, and this meant the storage trial had to be abandoned because they didn't have enough fruit to take into the post-harvest part of things. The Hayward, worst damage was 30%, and this is sort of supported by previous data on, this difference in cultivar contradicts previous data which has shown no impact of cultivar. So that earlier trial with the natural infestations showed no difference between cultivar with damage by brown marmorated stink bug, but we did see it in this trial, and the researchers hypothesised that it's because in Gold 3 a lot of it's dropping to the ground and people are underestimating the impact, but whereas they had a direct measure here. So the jury's a little bit out on the cultivar susceptibility with brown marmorated stink bug. Not surprisingly, the more sting events, the more damage, and again, the damage was done in different ways on the different cultivars. So stings around the top of a Gold 3 fruit, and then all around on a Hayward piece of fruit, and the damage is shown in that bottom right-hand corner. Interestingly, the researchers found that we actually reached a temperature that was lethal to the brown marmorated stink bug adults in those bags when they got up to about 33 or 35 degrees. You'll probably ask me why brown marmorated stink bug is surviving in Italy, because we know we can get up to 40 degrees in our orchards. It's because in those temperatures, the brown marmorated stink bug adults are probably finding a cooler, shady place to hide, whereas in the bags, they've got nowhere to run. And obviously, high humidity is quite favourable for brown marmorated stink bug survival. So similar kind of timing in relation to when the damage was seen versus the data that we saw for the natural infestation of the time of the high numbers of the different life stages. Mid-August was worst in Gold 3, and then late August, early September, worse in Hayward with those higher numbers coming in. What was a little bit surprising but pleasing is that with those Hayward fruit that had been stung and then were put into storage, there was no observation of decrease in fruit quality. However, I'd be interested to know if, in terms of getting a big pellet together with a lot of fruit that's been damaged producing ethylene, if that does potentially impact storage. So it was an individual fruit assessment rather than a whole pellet. With the natural infestation work, it was an opportunity to have a look for naturally occurring biological control agents of stink bugs, and the researchers did note the regular occurrences of some known predators, things like earwigs, spiders and ants, but the impact wasn't recorded. They did pick up a couple of potential parasitoids, and there are some beautiful photos, so I thought I'd share them with you. On the bottom left-hand corner, there's a tachinid parasitoid. Unfortunately, it wasn't able to complete development, so possibly not one that we'd be in a position to move forward with. And then on the right-hand side, you see some brown marmorated stink bug eggs that are dark, and from that, adult parasitoids have emerged from the Hymenoptera group. And so this is a potential source of parasitoids for us going forward. The identifications haven't been completed yet, and the impacts aren't known, but this is a potential opportunity for us. So what does this all mean in terms of if you were a group of Italian growers, what advice would I be giving you? So kiwi fruit are susceptible to attack whenever the fruit is present. So it appears that all fruit stages are susceptible to attack. There's definitely a second generation happening in Italy. It leads me to question if we'd get that here in New Zealand, because obviously our temperatures are a bit lower, but that's something that we don't know yet. The jury's out on that. Both cultivars are definitely hosts, but the impact in terms of the damage is different, and for me it's something that we need to maintain a watching brief in our post-harvest treatment of Hayward. And there's some potential biological control agents, but more work is required. Now obviously you're not a group of Italian growers, so what advice would I give to New Zealand growers? I think the key thing here is the Boy Scout motto about being prepared, and let's keep this out. Let's not have brown marmorated stink bug in New Zealand and have to deal with the challenges that our Italian and French growers are facing. What's great at one of the silver linings of the cloud of COVID is that one of our key pathways, as John mentioned earlier, are closed at the moment with limited people coming into New Zealand. And also on the back of some great work that's been done in terms of machinery coming from Italy, kind of trying to manage those non-human based pathways. But we have in here a group of people who can be biosecurity officers for their orchards and for their industry and for their regions. And so we encourage you to act as biosecurity officers and keep an eye out for brown marmorated stink bug and report any potential finds through the MPI Pest and Disease hotline.